So I have a list of books that classic works, ancient classics, modern classics that I've never read. That's sort of on my reading list. I don't have them written down, but sort of in the back of my mind. A lot of books that I really need to read one day, and because they're classics. And one of those books that was on that list up until this week was the book Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And so I just finished reading it. I thought I'd rectify that. I think it actually, I might have mentioned it in a sermon a few weeks ago, or maybe was going to, whatever the case. I'm kind of familiar with the book and what his main points are and everything. I mean, it's a classic. And, but I just never read it myself. And so I decided to do that this week. And, I'm telling you, it blew my mind. Blew my mind. This is a good book. I highly recommend it. It was much better than I thought it would be. Very easy to read. Very, dare I say, entertaining. It was fun to read. It really was. But it was so intriguing. It was so interesting. I mean, every page had things that you could have used pull quotes, out of, and it was so rich. But it's a relatively short book. It's not very long. I didn't check how many pages it was. I don't remember. But it's a good book. Highly recommend it. Let me tell you a little bit about the book. I won't tell you too much, but a little bit about it, just to whet your appetite to say, hey, you ought to read this book. He's basically talking about the communication process. That's the big picture. And that's something that I am very, very interested in. I'm a pastor. I'm a Baptist pastor, a Christian pastor. And so I'm very, very interested in the communication, dynamics of communication, how a message goes from the sender and the message and to the receiver, and how that works, and all the dynamics associated with that and all the rest. So that's basically what he's talking about, and how show business, especially television, has changed the way that we think, the way that we discuss things, the way that actually the subtitle of the book is, I think it's Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. So amusing ourselves to death. And so he kind of walks through, well, what he says, the medium is the message. The medium is the message. Well, I take that back. He's quoting someone else. I don't remember who said that. Some famous person, I think, said that. Classic. The medium is the message. And he pushes back against that a little bit, and he changed it and says the medium is the metaphor. I wasn't really quite clear how he was making a distinction. But whatever the case, his point was that when you change mediums, the message changes. You can't say the message is going to say the same and the medium changes. No, the medium is going to change the message. And so he kind of walks us through from the ancient times, when the only way of form of communication was just through public discourse, or personal one-on-one conversation, face to face, and you might go hear an oratory or something like that, and then public debate and all the rest. But then when writing was invented, and then especially the printing press, and you have pamphlets, and then the news wire, and all the rest, just drastically changed. And then television drastically changed the way that we think and the way that we discuss things, and the way that public discourse takes place. And it's just fascinating how what he was talking about. Some obvious things, like, it's pretty common knowledge. People say it all the time that our politicians from years ago would not be elected today because they didn't have the face for television, and you got to kind of have that, and you got to have the disposition for television. FDR would not be elected today, or anybody in a wheelchair, or somebody overweight like Taft or whatever wouldn't be electable today. Well, even though we do have a president today that suffers from dementia or whatever he's going on and can't string sentences together, but whatever the case, the public persona of things changes how we do things. And I mean, classic example. I mean, here I am doing a off the cuff, off the top of my head book review instead of what would have happened years ago was a well thought out, book review in print in the back of a journal, a professional journal or something like that. And here I am just spouting off the top of my head what my first impressions are after just finishing reading this book, but here on YouTube. So I would recommend. He deals with how it changed things in, especially he has a chapter on politics and electability and politics and those discussions. Like I just mentioned, religion. He has a whole chapter on that and televangelists and all that garbage and how that has changed religion because we can now have it on video. And it was really made you think, now that my sermons are on YouTube, how is that changing things? And I think it is. He didn't mention this. He's not even a Christian, but he didn't mention this, and he was writing this long before YouTube. But it's very different if you go to public worship and you're sitting in the church building with brothers and sisters in Christ and your covenant of faith and part of the worship service, rather than just sitting at home watching the sermon on YouTube while you're making breakfast or whatever. Totally different, just so you know. But anyway, back to the book. He talks about that. He talks about education, especially education. And he talked a lot about Sesame Street and just some fascinating insights into the dynamics of learning, and he didn't see it as a good thing. He didn't say it as a good thing, and a lot of things that I would have thought were positive. I mean, he doesn't say it's totally bad. He does say there's some positive aspects of television, but some aspects of it that are not as positive as we might think. And so it's very interesting. And then the whole thing he's mentioning in the last chapter, he deals with it specifically. Are we living in an Orwellian world or a Huxleyan world? You know what I'm saying? He said clearly a Huxleyan world, which is so ironic. He's writing the book. I think the book was published in 1984, literally in 1984 when he published the book, which dates it somewhat. He's not talking about the internet. He's not talking about social media at all. But it's still very, very relevant, and so I would recommend it. Now, I was thinking, if somebody's reading this and maybe they're in their 20s or 30s, a lot of the references aren't going to make any sense to you. I mean, he's talking about Who Shot JR, and Hill Street Blues and Welcome Back, Kotter, and those kind of things that I would assume people today, if you're born in the 90s or 2000s, you're going to like, what is he talking about? But I don't think that'll be too distracting. I think the message will still be there. But if you're, I was in junior high and high school in the early 80s, mid 80s, and all those references were so vivid in my mind, and his critique of entertainment culture was just spot on, and like I said, especially relevant for us as believers when we are concerned about our message and things that we need to think through. That doesn't mean that we should not use all the media that is available to us, from podcasts to YouTube and television and radio and print and everything else. But we ought to think through some of the things that he says. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut this off because I want you to get off of YouTube. Don't go watch television. Instead, go read a book. And a great book would be Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description to Amazon Books so you can pick up a print copy. But I would highly recommend this book.